So today, Kevin McCarthy is going to try to become Speaker of the House of Representatives. But now, the day before the vote is supposed to take place, when I'm recording this video, he doesn't seem to have the votes yet. What could happen today? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So I'm glad to be back after a desperately needed break. Happy New Year to everybody. But one person who is desperately hoping for a Happy New Year is Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader who hopes to be elected Speaker of the House today. Now, one thing that has become clear as I've had conversations with friends and relatives over the holidays is that there's a lot of confusion about how we actually elect a Speaker of the House. In fact, back when I worked in Washington as a member of a congressman's staff, I actually took a class with our administrative assistant, basically the chief of staff of the congressional office, where we learned about House procedure. Now, that may sound like something that would make your eyes glaze over, but just showing how much of a junkie I am, I actually found it fascinating. You see, one of the revelations that came out of this class is the fact that everything the House does is governed by majority vote. We sometimes have this impression that certain procedures happen just because they're set in place to happen. But in fact, that's not the case. Everything that the House does is done by majority vote. Let me give you an example of this. People frequently bemoan the fact that there are certain limits on debate within the House, and much to the jealousy of senators, the House can move very quickly in accomplishing its business. The basis for that is something called the Rules Committee. Every time a piece of legislation is going to be debated by the House, it comes before the Rules Committee, which, by a majority vote of the committee, a majority, of course, determined by who has majority control of the House, well, that committee will then propose a rule. And that rule will specify how much debate there's going to be, who's going to manage the debate for each side, how the time will be allocated, what kinds of amendments will be allowed, etc., etc., etc. Now, that Rules Committee, though, has absolutely no power, except for the fact that the members of the House majority for the party that control the Rules Committee tend to vote for the rule that was proposed by the Rules Committee. And different committees will basically take steps to ensure that their party's members will vote for the proposals of that committee. I actually experienced this firsthand when I was working on Capitol Hill, and my boss went to the Appropriations Subcommittee, basically to ask for funding for our district. Well, while we were sitting there waiting for him to be called to give his testimony, I saw other members of Congress who would go up and make their plea to the Appropriations Committee. Now, I put that in quotation marks because the fact of the matter is, it was just one member of an Appropriations Subcommittee who was there receiving all the information. And most of the members of Congress who went there didn't actually say much of anything. They made a brief statement and then provided a written statement, which was what was going to be included in the record. Most of the interaction between the member of the Appropriations Committee and the different members of Congress who are going there asking for favors essentially involved the member of the Appropriations Committee asking the member of Congress if they were going to vote for the ultimate appropriations bill that would come out of the committee. The message is not subtle. In effect, the Appropriations Committee is saying, if you want us to give you what you're asking for, you need to commit to vote for this legislation. And to send that message even more clearly, I was there when one member of Congress went up to make his request, and the member of the Appropriations Committee looked down on his sheet and said, I see you voted against our appropriations bill 10 years ago. You're not going to do that again, are you? Again, the message is not subtle. There's an expectation of discipline within the caucus that they're going to vote for the proposals that are approved by the different committees where that party has control. So the fact that the Rules Committee has any control over what happens with legislation as it goes through its process relies entirely upon the House voting in a majority vote to approve the rule as proposed. Now, the House members don't need to vote for the rule. But I guarantee you, if a House member were to vote against the rule that was approved by their party, the next time they have legislation that they want to get through the House, they will face some stern questioning about why they bucked the party's leadership on that particular vote. The reason I've given you this background is that, like with anything else that the House of Representatives does, electing the Speaker is done by a majority vote. Now, what will happen is each party will gather together ahead of time in what's called a caucus, and they will debate behind closed doors which candidate they want to support as a party. The Democrats, we hear, voted unanimously for Hakeem Jeffries to be the Democratic candidate for Speaker. Things didn't go quite so smoothly for Kevin McCarthy in his caucus. Ultimately, he was able to eke out a majority of his caucus. But what's really interesting is that at least 5 members of the House, Republican members of Congress, have stated that despite the fact that the party voted within its caucus to support Kevin McCarthy, they would not be supporting him on the House vote, which is what really counts. You see, the whole reason that the parties gather in caucus to decide who's going to be their candidate for Speaker ahead of time is so that they don't waste their votes, that they've decided ahead of time who's going to be their candidate, and the assumption is that everybody in the party then is going to vote for that person, whether they voted for that person in caucus or not. See, the only vote that matters is that vote on the House floor. So when they get to the House floor, if those 5 members of Congress vote against Kevin McCarthy, he will only get 217 votes, not enough to be elected Speaker by 1 vote. That's the problem that Kevin McCarthy has. He's got such a narrow majority, and frankly, he's not particularly positively perceived by just about anybody. It's not like Nancy Pelosi, who, even though she made enemies, she was widely respected among Democrats. So last time when she was elected Speaker, you actually had a few Democratic members of Congress who did not vote for her. But what they did is that they either didn't attend the vote or they voted present. The only votes that count are the ones that specifically name someone as their candidate for Speaker. So let's just assume here that all 213 Democratic members of the House vote for Hakeem Jeffries as expected. Kevin McCarthy gets 217 votes. Now, the key question for those 5 members is, will they write in somebody else? For example, could they say that they want Donald Trump to be elected Speaker of the House? Could happen. His name has actually been proposed in the past as a possible candidate for Speaker. If all 5 of them vote for Donald Trump, or somebody else for that matter, Kevin McCarthy will not have the votes to be elected Speaker. On the other hand, if all 5 decide simply to vote present, their votes don't count, and Kevin McCarthy will be elected Speaker. So these 5 have a lot of power right now, and they're certainly holding it over Kevin McCarthy's head. McCarthy, who's never been exactly known as a profile in courage, is desperately trying to give them whatever he can to try to get them onto his side. But this is where McCarthy runs into a problem that's inherent in the way Republicans are lately, which is that they're not actually for anything. They just want to burn things down. When Nancy Pelosi was running for Speaker, she could identify perhaps some members who weren't enthusiastic about her candidacy. But yet she could go to them and negotiate with them something that would perhaps assuage their concerns and bring them on board. Because, of course, when Democrats run for Congress, their goal is to try to get something done. They want to improve the lives of people. That's not what Republicans want, and particularly these hard-right Republicans who are resisting McCarthy's speakership bid. They just want to burn things down. There's nothing that McCarthy can give them that will bring them on board. They just want to cause trouble, and the best way to cause trouble is by making it difficult for McCarthy to ascend to the speakership. So where does that leave us? Well, the unlikeliest scenario is that these 5 decide to vote for the Democratic candidate, Hakeem Jeffries, which would then result in him being elected Speaker of the House. He'd get 218 votes if all 5 voted for him. It's pretty clear, though, that's not going to happen. I would say the most likely scenario is that the 5 simply vote present, allowing McCarthy to ultimately ascend to the speakership. But if they decide they do want to make trouble and vote for, say, Donald Trump for Speaker, well, then you might see a situation where Kevin McCarthy can't put together the votes he needs to be elected Speaker. That could lead to a couple developments. One might be that he tries to make concessions to Democrats to try to get some Democrats to support him, or that some other moderate, for example, candidate arises, whether they be a Democrat or a Republican, who is able to put together 218 votes among moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans. Or maybe someone else will arise within the Republican conference who will be elected Speaker, who can put together the 218 votes required. Frankly, I think Steve Scalise, for example, is much more well-liked among the Republican Party office holders than Kevin McCarthy, and he probably could put together 218 votes for a speakership bid. The problem is he's loyal to McCarthy and has said he's not going to run against him. And that's the best thing that McCarthy has going for him right now, which is that there's nobody really else within the Republican Party to take his place. So these 5 members, and perhaps some others on the hard right, might throw their temper tantrum and cause some trouble for McCarthy. But my expectation is ultimately McCarthy will be able to put together enough votes to be elected Speaker. For the simple fact that there really is nobody else in the Republican Party who can do it, and their greater fear would be that, say, a more moderate candidate is able to put together the votes among Democrats and Republicans to get to 218. With the Democrats only needing 5 votes to make that happen, you could see we're in such a narrowly divided House that is actually a possibility. And that's not something these hard right Republican congressmen will want to see happen. It will be interesting to watch the vote, though, and I have to say, I am kind of enjoying watching Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans squirm and appear in disarray. Will Rogers' joke used to be that he didn't belong to an organized political party. He was a Democrat. But these days, I've got to tell you, the Republicans are looking in much more disarray than the Democrats. Well, if you want to see my video I did a little while ago about my predictions for how the Republicans will handle their control of the House, check out this video over here. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.